Which conspiracy theory is so believable that it might be true? The last theory is crazy. The Laurel Canyon Conspiracy. Basically, if you look at the counterculture revolutionaries in the music industry in the 60s, most of them were the children of military intelligence people. So the theory is that the free love, lots of drugs movement they inspired was done intentionally to distract the youth from a full-scale revolution. The thought was, if the angry youth of the mid to late 60s were too high and getting laid all the time, they would stop caring as much about societal ills and then basically sleepwalk through the 70s, which they did. I stumbled upon this when I was reading up on Jim Morrison and how his father was the one who called in the fake strike at the Gulf of Tonkin that kicked off the Vietnam War, and which was shown later to have been a false flag. Turns out, a lot of his contemporaries were also children of highly placed military people with ties to intelligence. Strange that they all wound up in Laurel Canyon as part of the same movement. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory at this point, but a lot of people still don't acknowledge that your internet searches and social media profiles area absolutely being used as training models by major IT companies. I was a drunk college student and had access to them to run AI training. If you still think you're off the grid, you're an idiot. Being frank, it's not a big deal if you don't have dark shit to hide. Those people are too busy building the new technological world to give a shit that you look at midget porn. But don't delude yourself to think people don't have access to anything you do on the internet. There is no reason why the shipbuilders would have changed the portholes on the Titanic when they were nearly done building it. That piece was not one of the pieces cannibalized from the Titanic to repair the Olympic that would have needed to be replaced by a different piece. The only answer is that the ship in the final picture, which is the ship that left port on April 10, 1912, and was met with a terrible fate near Newfoundland, was not the Titanic, but actually the Olympic. You can find pictures from newspapers further supporting this, as they clearly show the name of the ship and the wrong number orientation of portholes. I doubt we'll ever know one way or another, since the wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic is quickly being covered with sediment and will be completely buried and inaccessible soon, and pieces of the ship that was retired in 1935 and dismantled in 1937 are both difficult to find and difficult to authenticate, and anybody who might be able to either confirm or deny this theory are all dead. Jeffrey Epstein is a Florida billionaire who probably is running an underage sex trafficking ring. Edit. Well, Epstein just got arrested for sex trafficking minors, so this is more a conspiracy fact, not a theory, lol. A brief background. In 2007, dozens of underage women came forward saying Epstein was having sex with them in Florida. They also claimed that he passed the girls along to other elites and ran a sex ring, blackmailing service kinda. Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Prince Andrew are all known associates of Epstein and would go on his plane dubbed Lolita Express to a private island in the Caribbean. What happened next was ridiculous. Epstein hired the best legal team ever, like as good as OJ's, Dershowitz was involved, and all that. Acosta was the prosecutor against Epstein, and he is now appointed by Trump in his cabinet. Acosta gave Epstein the plea deal of his life. He was found guilty of one charge of sex with a minor, in spite of being accused by dozens of girls, and had to register as a sex offender. He got 13 months in jail, but he only served 10. Here is the kicker. He could leave jail 6 times a week to go work at his at-home office. He was supposed to go to prison, but stayed in a local jail for some reason. He was granted immunity. All co-conspirators in the case were given immunity. This means that if further evidence comes out against other people with the case, they can't be prosecuted again. His house butler was found guilty of obstruction of justice regarding the evidence against Epstein. He got more jail time, years, than Epstein. The police commissioner on the case stepped down because he thought it was rigged. Miami Herald said it was the deal of a lifetime. Epstein is now free and still has billions of dollars. Acosta has told friends that he was scared to go against the powers that be because they would squash his career. This all happened in 2008, I think. The DOJ just reopened the case last month due to fuckery going on Clinton and Trump, among other famous people. Like Kevin Spacey have been documented flying on Epstein's plane to his infamous Lolita Express. A Miami judge just ruled last week, literally, that Epstein's case was illegal and violated law because Acosta did not consult the victims before bringing the plea deal. Jeffrey Epstein is a Florida billionaire who probably is running an underage sex trafficking ring. Edit. Well, Epstein just got arrested for sex trafficking minors, so this is more a conspiracy fact, not a theory, lol. A brief background. In 2007, dozens of underage women came forward saying Epstein was having sex with them in Florida. They also claimed that he passed the girls along to other elites and ran a sex ring, blackmailing service kinda. Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Prince Andrew are all known associates of Epstein and would go on his plane dubbed Lolita Express to a private island in the Caribbean. What happened next was ridiculous. Epstein hired the best legal team ever, like as good as OJ's, Dershowitz was involved, and all that. Acosta was the prosecutor against Epstein, and he is now appointed by Trump in his cabinet. Acosta gave Epstein the plea deal of his life. He was found guilty of one charge of sex with a minor, in spite of being accused by dozens of girls, and had to register as a sex offender. He got 13 months in jail, but he only served 10. Here is the kicker. He could leave jail 6 times a week to go work at his at-home office. He was supposed to go to prison, but stayed in a local jail for some reason. He was granted immunity. All co-conspirators in the case were given immunity. This means that if further evidence comes out against the case, they can't be prosecuted again. His house butler was found guilty of obstruction of justice regarding the evidence against Epstein. He got more jail time, years, than Epstein. The police commissioner on the case stepped down because he thought it was rigged. Miami Herald said it was the deal of a lifetime. Epstein is now free and still has billions of dollars. Acosta has told friends that he was scared to go against the powers that be because they would squash his career. This all happened in 2008, I think. The DOJ just reopened the case last month due to fuckery going on Clinton and Trump, among other famous people. Like Kevin Spacey have been documented flying on Epstein's plane to his infamous Lolita Express. A Miami judge just ruled last week, literally, that Epstein's case was illegal and violated law because Acosta did not consult the victims before bringing the plea deal. That there are hundreds of companies that operate tens of thousands of Reddit accounts each. They have been auto-regging these accounts for years, use scripts to auto-post and comment, and have humans that shift through all the accounts to make various comments to maintain these accounts. These companies have the ability to control and game their way to the front of Reddit. Huge brands use them, special interest groups use them, political parties use them. It's not a conspiracy, it's a real thing. My conspiracy theory: Facebook purposely attempts to ruin people's relationships because the drama gets more views, and more views sell more ads. Several years ago, they introduced a feature so that your comments on other pages would show up in your friends' feeds. So if you're secretly an atheist and you comment on some atheist page, it shows up in your devout Southern Baptist Grandma Muriel's timeline, even though it's a conversation that has nothing to do with her, and there's no reason for it to be. As a result, Facebook outs you to your family, and Grandma is typing away at all the evil Satanists trying to corrupt her grandson. And if you comment on a public post, it's unavoidable. You used to be able to control who could see your comments even on public posts by other pages, but at the same time Facebook introduced their tattletale feature, they took that ability away. Now if they were to stumble across the same page, they'd be able to see your comment. But after that change, Facebook started pointing everybody you know directly to it. Not to mention, the privacy settings are difficult to find, difficult to understand, and with each passing year gives you less and less control over who sees what. By forcibly combining everybody's social circles, Facebook is trying to generate conflict. They want to generate conflict because the conflict happens on Facebook, which means people logging onto Facebook more often and seeing more ads. They're essentially an internet tabloid, except instead of showcasing the personal drama of celebrities for clicks and sales, they're doing it to you instead. Ever notice how the vast majority of family drama, relationship fights, etc. these days happens on Facebook? That's by design. Facebook is literally destroying the social fabric to make a buck. Consuming relationship stability, like it's an oil refinery consuming crude. Your phone's microphone is constantly hot, and it's listening for keywords to target advertising. Most glaring instance where this happened to me was when I walked into a colleague's office. He had just gotten a standing desk, but one that goes on top of his existing desk rather than a standalone, pun, model. That's important to note. I said, "Nice standing desk. When did you get that?" "Thanks, just today," he replied. That was literally all that was said about the desk. We talked about work-related stuff, and as I walked out and checked my phone, there was an ad on Facebook for that exact model of standing desk. I have never owned one, wanted one, or Googled one before. Yet there it was on my feed. Tinfoil hat be damned, they listen in. I knew about the NSA spying for 5 to 6 years before the Snowden leaks. Didn't know it was the NSA, but did know it had to be government. Anyone who worked with backbone internet providers in IT knew there were black boxes that shouldn't be there, and that if you asked about them, you were fired instantly. Or if you had a cool boss, were told immediately after asking that you actually hadn't asked, this conversation never happened, and if you did, you were finished. I was a conspiracy theorist at the time and knew nobody in my circle would believe me, so I didn't tell many people. But I did tell my dad, who flat out told me I was wrong, misunderstood the technology, the government, and gave me a bunch of reasons I was wrong, and why that would be impossible. I tried to explain traffic shaping and what I thought an invisible intercept attack vector could be, and he didn't even humor me. Full disclosure, I was wrong about how the data was collected on a technical level, just not that it was being done. He's an old school in the biz since the 70s engineer who was literally in the room saw and part of some major tech inventions we all take for granted. We didn't talk about it again until a decade later. Out of nowhere, he gave me a very sincere apology. He had clearly spent many years thinking about it. And even though I was very early in my career at the time, he told me, verbatim, "If anyone would have known, it would have been you. I'm sorry I didn't believe you." Literally a career highlight, LOL. An apology from my dad, confirming my conspiracy theory, another 5 to 6 years after the whole country already knew. Thanks, Ed. Pretty much every scandal ever started as a conspiracy theory. Think of it. It's a theory about a conspiracy. And conspiracies do, of course, happen. So, we have a weird subtext surrounding them, that they're not usually true, but in reality, the ones that are true are usually resolved in a few years, and the wacky ones with little evidence, Flat Earth for example, persist for a long time. Pretty much every scandal ever started as a conspiracy theory. Think of it. It's a theory about a conspiracy, and conspiracies do, of course, happen. So, we have a weird subtext surrounding them, that they're not usually true, but in reality, the ones that are true are usually resolved in a few years, and the wacky ones with little evidence, Flat Earth for example, persist for a long time. The 14th Dalai Lama worked for the CIA and was paid very well for his work during a decades-long anti-Chinese covert operation in the mid-20th century to keep the political concept of an autonomous Tibet alive, to strengthen Tibetan resistance against Chinese communist efforts, and to weaken the overall influence, capabilities, and territorial aspirations of the Chinese government. Many, Reagan doing a deal with Iran to keep hostages longer, Reagan and Bush Sr. directly violating the constitutional separation of powers and trading weapons with Iran for aid to destabilize a Central American country. Florida purging voter rolls by taking out names that sounded black and thus swinging the election to Bush. A lot of people are confusing, "We discovered something the government was doing in secret," with conspiracy theories. For it to be a conspiracy theory, people would have to be talking about it, someone denying it, and then it turns out to be true after all. If it were ever proven JFK was shot by multiple gunmen, then that would be a conspiracy theory come true. If it were ever proven that 9/11 was an inside job, that would qualify. Discovering that MKUltra was this secret program that did awful things isn't the same thing OP is asking for. No one was rumoring about it for years before it was discovered. No one knew about it, so no one was being told, "Nah, that's just a conspiracy theory." If Area 51 is hiding aliens, that would qualify. The AF confirming that the F-17 was flying secretly at Area 51 for years, and some people reported it as a UFO and were told, "No flying triangles here" isn't the same kind of thing. There is some subtext in this question that suggests, conspiracy theory means crazy or irrational. There have been many conspiracies that have turned out to be true, and it's not crazy to believe a conspiracy theory. What is crazy is to engage in paranoid, messy, and inconsistent thinking in order to buy into a conspiracy theory. It's a shame that the word has come to always suggest someone is being irrational, because that's exactly how powerful people get away with their bullshit. I'd like to think to some extent that the dead internet theory has somewhat been proven true, though it's hard to say. The issue is that bots are brute force, so the only real way to prevent bot activity on the internet is through paywalls. But paywalls also naturally reduce human participation to only those interested in paying for the content. Twitter is an example of a platform that lost a shit ton of activity once money was used to verify real humans. But it just as easily could have been the fact that you had to pay for this feature, alongside them completely ruining the app with rate-limiting features. Watergate. The Pentagon Papers are published by the NYT and then other papers when the NYT is stifled. Nixon wanted leaks to the press stopped. One break-in of the plumbers meant to plug the leaks was to the office of the psychiatrist of the man who leaked the Pentagon Papers. Another was an attempt to bug the DNC offices inside the Pentagon Hotel. The spying effort turns out to be broader. The cover-up includes Nixon's firing the special prosecutor and abolishing the office of the special prosecutor, actions that became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. The big lie. On election night 2020, a drunk Rudolph Giuliani suggests that Trump say there was fraud at the polls and that he won. Such a claim echoed Trump's repeated assertion after the 2016 election that millions had voted illegally and that his true margin of victory was of a similar size, perhaps out of embarrassment that he had lost the popular vote. Bannon said to the drunk Giuliani, "You can't do that," and several Trump staffers try to isolate Giuliani until he sobered up. Trump got wind of the conspiracy idea and liked it. Privately, he voiced his embarrassment over losing and his inability to publicly acknowledge that Biden had won. In the subsequent 60-plus court cases over voter fraud, Giuliani presented essentially no evidence for his claims. As a sworn officer of the court, he was stripped of his license to practice law in New York for not keeping his oath, and his license in D.C. is in the process of being revoked. He and several other agents of Trump are facing criminal charges for their role in overturning election results and keeping Trump in power. Trump and his agents asked governors and secretaries of state to somehow find additional votes for Trump, including an infamous hour-long taped call to the Republican Georgia Secretary of State, in which Trump requested yet more recounts. "I just want 11,780 votes, a number greater than the margin he won Michigan by in 2016. Trump and his team asked governors and secretaries of state not to certify the popular vote results and pointed to non-existent voter fraud to encourage state legislatures to set aside the popular vote and choose a fresh slate. The Trump team helped prepare fake certificates in 7 states that Trump lost: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. In many cases, these certificates falsely stated that the electors were their state's duly elected and qualified electors. Those phony certificates were then submitted to the National Archives in Congress. These 7 states all went ahead and certified Biden's Electoral College victory on December 14. Yet groups of pro-Trump Republicans, declaring themselves the rightful electors, gathered as well. The evidence suggests that many in Trump's inner circle understood that the fake elector scheme wouldn't keep him in the White House, but the goal was to create the illusion of a contested election. Once the GOP-led state legislatures didn't go along with the plan, the idea was to, at minimum, give Vice President Mike Pence the pretext to either block Congress from recognizing Biden's win or delay the vote count when he performed his ceremonial role on January 6. Obviously, Pence didn't go along with that plan. When he didn't, Trump voiced to Mark Meadows that he'd be fine with the mob killing Pence to hold up certification of the election results. One police officer was beaten to death, but Pence escaped harm. While he was not aware at the time that Trump wanted him dead, he did refuse transportation by a member of the Secret Service away from the Capitol, an action that he viewed could further hinder his duty to certify the election results. There is evidence to suggest that some believed the Trump team could cast enough doubt and then take the case to the Supreme Court. where they apparently hoped the justices would issue a favorable ruling. Nearly 1,100 people have been charged in connection with attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Over 400 are currently serving time for their sedition. The longest sentence was 18 years, given to a founder of the Oath Keepers, until the former national chairman of the Proud Boys was sentenced to 22 years. In court, many expressed surprise that they were doing what Trump wanted, but they were the ones paying the price. A ton. I'm a conspiracy enthusiast, as opposed to a theorist who believes most, all of them. But even a cursory search brings up some textbook examples of conspiracy theories that ended up being true. MKUltra, Operation Paperclip, Tuskegee, the government's involvement in the crack epidemic, Iran-Contra, Fast and Furious, etc. What's interesting is that often the true conspiracy of it isn't the shady shit that the government is nominally allowed to do. It's the cover-up that constitutes the conspiracy. Do enough reading and it gets pretty spooky. It may seem like an extreme stance, but I'm at the point where I think you're more naive to dismiss every conspiracy theory. Granted, most of them are utter bullshit, and some are very dangerous, but to act like major powers are incapable of using their power in ways that are counter to the public good is just fundamentally untrue. The U.S. government has indeed been closely monitoring the communications of its citizens for a long time now. I liked a lot of things about Obama, but when he said the government wasn't reading your emails or listening in on your calls, it's just metadata that was deeply disingenuous and probably false as well. The NSA has a $52 billion budget and the ability to monitor tens of millions of calls a second. You think they're not using it? Back in the 80s, a big conspiracy was surrounding Ronald Reagan's health. It went around that he had dementia, Alzheimer's, and other mental conditions from his second year in office. Turns out most everything the conspirators said was true. The one thing Reagan never really lost was his acting ability. He could read a script perfectly, but couldn't tell you what year it was. MKUltra. The CIA had taken US citizens and tortured them while giving them LSD and other things to see what happened. What happened was one of them, who was a mathematics prodigy attending Harvard and likely one of the great minds of our era, had such psychological issues afterwards that he turned into a hermit who ended up bombing a bunch of places. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Charles Manson also was possibly experimented on by MKUltra. I can tell from a different perspective that I read people very well. I've had this skill since childhood, likely because I'm slightly autistic, and it was my way of connecting with others. As a teenager, I used it to pick up girls. Before approaching one, I would observe a few sentences, behaviors, or patterns, and build a mental model of her. Teenagers usually don't have complex personas, so it was fairly easy. Once I had enough information, I would craft a persona to match hers, tell a few jokes that fit her vibe, and boom. Suddenly, we had so much in common, like soulmates. Haha, it worked like a charm. Over time, though, I realized I didn't have a personality of my own. I was using this skill to connect with people, adopting 20 different personas, none of which felt truly mine. When I recognized this, I tried to stop, or at least tone it down. It's not something I do intentionally, it just happens. My boss recently told me she's impressed by how quickly I can adjust and read the room. At work, most people like me, and I genuinely try to be friendly. I have no bad intentions. I know this might sound like I'm some kind of psycho, but I'm not. I've never wanted to harm anyone.